Thank you very much, Rabbi Kroll. Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to spend the last half hour of class during Aseret Yemei Teshuva together here in a room. I remember one thing from my first day of high school, which is a few decades back. I knew only a couple of students when I was joining a much larger school, and I don't remember anything that happened the first morning of that day. But I do remember an early afternoon Ivrit class. The teacher called each student's name and asked what elementary school he attended. It was an all-boys school in high school. And when it was my turn, I said that I had attended the Yeshiva of Eastern Parkway. The teacher chuckled and said, you're probably going to have a tough time in this class. I almost cried as a first-day ninth grader, but I didn't. I did go home and tell my Israeli-raised mom that she needed to give me a crash course in Hebrew because I was about to fail this class. You see, I attended an elementary school that learned Chumash, where you say Lashon Kodesh to Yiddish. That means we read the psukim in Hebrew and translated them into Yiddish. And the teacher assumed that I was not going to be able to manage an Ivrit class coming from a school like that. My mom tried her best to teach me the binyanim over one Shabbat, not a very realistic task. And by the following week, however, I discovered that the class was not at all as hard as I had feared, and I actually did really well. But I remember that moment for the power that the words of that teacher carried for me and how it stayed with me. I still think about it more than 40 years later. I was steeped in anxiety for 3 days, sure that I was doomed because of that one sentence of the teacher. As a teacher myself, I think of that scene a lot. How often have I inadvertently made a student feel less capable rather than encouraged? How often have I thought I was just making a joke and it actually hurt someone? I was thinking of this story because our theme for this year is midot, developing our character. There are many aspects to developing good character. Today, during Aseret Yemei Teshuva, I want to focus on one, the power of words and the responsibility that comes with that power. Chazal understood the importance of using these days to reflect on how we use speech. I ask that you pay attention next time to the Asham news that we say, that we have been saying over Slichot, and will say numerous times over the next couple of days. At least 6 of the 24 relate to speech. That's 25%. And in the Al-Chetz, the percentage, depending on how you count them, is about 11 out of the 44. That's also 25%. That means that Chazal understood that how we speak, the words that we use, actually carry a lot of weight, and we need to think about them, and think about that in particular during this week. There's a pasuk in Mishlei that says, "Hachayim v'hamavet biyad halashon." Language carries matters of life and death in its hands. Words that we say can prop a person up and set them on a path of strength and growth, or they can do the opposite. And we use a lot of words. It's worth taking a moment to put a number to it. For quite a while, social scientists have been studying how many words people speak each day on average. Think about it for a second. I wonder if you take a guess in your head. Many of the studies, actually, when they were doing the studies, were exploring, they were interested in whether men speak more than women speak more than men. I think that right now, the studies kind of agree that there's not a significant difference, but it is good to know the number of words on average they say that we speak a day. It's around 16,000. That's a lot of words. about 16,000 words a day on average. That is a lot to be responsible for. And for that reason, I wanted to focus on speech, al-chetz, in the focusing, as part of our focusing on midot is our theme of the year. There are a bunch of them, but I want to focus on two. The first al-chet that I want to focus on says, al-chet shechatanu lefanecha bilatzon. Leitzanut is kind of cynicism, you'd say. And he translated in Sidurim something like, for the sin we committed before you by ridiculing, by making light of things. I want to think about that a little bit. There is a nursery rhyme that you probably remember that says, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names can never hurt me. And we have nursery rhymes that say what they say, and we don't think about it because we say them over and over, but we should actually stop and think about that. Is it true that names can never hurt a person? Back in 2017, Lisa Feldman Barrett, one of the top psychologists and neuroscientists in the world, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times entitled, "When is Speech Violence?" In it, she argued that scientifically, speech can cause stress, stress can cause harm to the body, and therefore speech can be violence. There was another world-renowned social psychologist, his name is Jonathan Haidt, who wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And he disagreed with her in an article that he wrote in the Atlantic magazine, and that became kind of a back and forth debate for a while. And I want to share with you just a couple of minutes of the debate that they had, the exchange that they had when they met in person.
One of the main reasons we have a brain is to regulate our bodies. There's a fancy name for this, scientists call it allostasis, but I like to refer to it just as simply like a body budget. So your brain isn't budgeting money for your body, it's budgeting glucose and salt and water and so on. So it's running a budget. And when you exercise, or actually in any kind of stress, you're basically making a huge withdrawal, and then you have to replenish that budget. And if you do, that's a really good thing. In fact, stressing a nervous system regularly and allowing it to recover is actually really healthy, and it builds a really strong body and mind. However, chronic stress is really where the brain starts to run a deficit in its body budget. And you start to feel really unpleasant, and you are at risk for various illnesses, and you will show eventually even brain atrophy in particular regions of the brain. So this is these are scientific studies that have been replicated, and as close to a fact as we would ever say a scientist would ever claim that a fact exists. Because for us, the world is full of probabilities. And the evidence shows, surprisingly, that words, verbal aggression, is as potent as physical aggression and sexual abuse by a non-relative. That's what the research shows. The research has linked words, verbal aggression, to brain atrophy, to metabolic illness, to just a whole host of things. So that doesn't mean that if someone says something that you don't like, that somehow you will immediately suffer from some kind of physical illness.
Jonathan, you're not in disagreement with the idea that words can cause that kind of harm.
No, I certainly agree on that empirical claim. The question is what implication that has for the proposition that words are violence. So first, let me just say, I've been working on this issue of viewpoint diversity and how essential it is, especially since 2015 when I co-founded Heterodox Academy, an organization that advocates for more viewpoint diversity in the academy. And from the beginning, it's been really clear that there are three fields that really, really get it. And so in addition to the social sciences in general, we talk about all kinds of controversial things. And Lisa's written beautifully on this. It wasn't mentioned, by the way, that Lisa is the president of the Association for Psychological Science, which is the major psychological organization for scientists. And she writes these beautiful columns about there's this wonderful line, and she has one called Take an Aisle Seat, where she talks about a project she did, deliberately meeting with people who have very different views on emotion as she does. And actually, Lisa and I have debated on emotion as well. And she has this wonderful line about how you can turn your adversaries into your greatest scientific resource, because it's only from having people challenge us that we actually get smarter. And so, I'm thrilled to be here talking with Lisa about this, and she models what this is all about. But the three fields that really get it are the social sciences, law, and journalism. Those three fields, the people I talk to, it doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right. Everybody, at least if they're over 30, it's a little different, it's a generational issue here, but everybody over 30 in those fields agrees, and we'll talk about that, I hope,
Yes.
agrees. We are all so prone to motivated reasoning. We are all so good at coming up with post hoc arguments for whatever we believe that you cannot get at the truth in law, journalism, or the social sciences unless you put people together to talk in ways that challenge each other's priors and each other's confirmation biases.
I want to be clear about where these two researchers agree and where they disagree. They both think that words can cause stress, and stress can cause harm, even physical, bodily harm. Professor Haidt, though, wants to make sure to distinguish between hurting someone with words, which is bad, and intellectual debate, which is good and necessary. I think that the Torah agrees. We certainly love intellectual debate. That's what Gemara is. That's what Talmud Torah is about, thinking, learning from each other, arguing. That's what we mean when we say 2 Jews, 3 opinions. That is the beauty of Am Yisrael. It is also true that the Torah teaches that words can oppress. There is a pasuk in Chumash. The Torah writes, "V'ger lo tonev v'lo tilchatzenu ki gerim heitem be'eretz Mitzrayim." You may not oppress the stranger with words, and the Torah connects that to our bondage in Egypt. I'd actually ask you to think about that for a moment. When we think of Mitzrayim, of bondage, of oppression, we think of physical oppression, which of course is true. Jews have experienced physical oppression in many forms. But the Torah is here teaching something else. People can oppress each other with words. And the word oppress is significant. It means to push a person down, to keep them low. We can imagine what that can mean when living under certain types of governments. But we don't necessarily think about it in the world within which we live. But the Torah is trying to bring that much closer to our daily lives, not just about Egypt or under some fascist or totalitarian regime, but the Torah uses the words ish et achiv, between brothers and sisters, between good friends and relatives, that we have to be careful about the pain that we cause. The Mishnah in Bava Metzia gives 3 examples of ona'at dvarim. That's what we're talking about. Ona'at dvarim means oppressing somebody with the words that we use. I want to share one example. It's the example of the Baal Teshuva, and I'll tell it in the following way. You can imagine a person, I'm going to call him Eli. He did not take davening seriously throughout his childhood, 5th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade. He used to talk his way through davening throughout elementary school and into high school. But sometime in the middle of 10th grade, he learned a little bit more about davening and began to take it more seriously. He stopped talking during shul, started going more often, saying more of the words. He was getting increasingly into it. And 2 months had passed, and he had continued to grow in that way. And as sometimes happens in shul, you can imagine this in a school minyan. One day, some kids in the minyan next to him are horsing around and just joking in a way that's making it hard for Eli to daven. He tries to move away, but it's hard for him to concentrate. So he feels in a bind. Should he say something? Should he just take it? Finally, he turns to his friends and says, "Can you please stop? It's making it hard for me to concentrate." Now, if I'm the friend there, I feel like I'm kind of called out, and it's uncomfortable. So he turns to Eli and says the following, and this is the example that the Mishnah is trying to teach. You know, Eli, you're a hypocrite. You're not any better than the rest of us. You did the same thing, and now you changed. Remember 2 months ago when you were doing something different, so now you can turn around and criticize us? Now, Eli is just trying to grow, and he's trying to do the best he can, and the situation is actually complicated. And the Mishnah says, reminding a Baal Tshuva of the past of that Baal Tshuva, what you used to do, is called Ona'at Dvarim. Why? Because a person is trying to grow, and because it makes me uncomfortable, I push that person back into place and say, you know what? Calm down. You're not as great as you think you are. As opposed to thinking of how I can use my words or think of his words in a way that I can reconsider where I'm at and then help him grow. The Mishnah is teaching that words that we use can serve as an obstacle to someone else's growth, or it can support and be a source of strength for our friend's growth. Our words should never be an obstacle to another person's growth. The al-chet shechatanu lefanecha bilatzon, of scoffing and ridiculing, and maybe when you say it over the next couple of days, to pay attention to latzon, scoffing, ridiculing, making a person feel bad, even unintentionally. We have to try to be aware so that does not happen. That actually is how I felt about my story from the first day of high school. It wasn't intentional. I don't think that teacher meant it. But what that teacher did was make me feel at that moment, I'm not able to do this, made me anxious, actually brought me down a notch. And I contrast that experience with a different story in my mind that actually sits with me also for a really long time. It was the first time that I laned. I was 12, and it was Simchas Torah in my shul, and there was a teenager, a guy who was a bunch of years older than me, and he said, you know what, maybe you'll consider laning Simchas Torah v'zot habracha. I decided to take that challenge, and I laned for the first time. I was nervous about it. It was a small room on the side of the shul, and after I finished, I overheard a person who I didn't know. He probably was in his 20s, a young married person, and he said to someone, I heard him say it, he said, who is that kid? He did a really great job. And he then came over to tell me that I did a good job, and he encouraged me to do it more often. And I had both of those stories in my mind, thinking about it and saying, how many times in our lives do we have the opportunity or the choice to react one way or to react the other way? And Chazal, our tefillah, is saying we need to take those factors seriously. Now, as I was thinking about these two stories next to each other, something struck me about davening, about our tefillah and Yom Kippur, that something's missing from our vidui. We actually articulate our mistakes in great detail. When we think about the vidui, it's the al-chet, I did this wrong, I did this wrong, I did this wrong. But when I thought about the second story, I realized I can also think about, well, what does it look like when it's done properly? In our davening, there's no tikkun ha-chet to parallel the al-chet. So we're just left with the acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but without a clear next step. So I want to share with you an institutional commitment, something that we are trying to work on in school from the school perspective that I hope is going to trickle down into the life of the school. I got to give you a little bit of background to understand where it's coming from. So back in 2019 and 2020, this thing that you've heard, this Machon Siach in our school, we did a survey of 20 yeshiva high school 10th and 12th graders. I want you to listen, please, to these statistics. We actually asked, it ended up being about 3,500 sophomores and seniors in 2019, and another 3,500 or so sophomores and seniors in 2020. From 20 different yeshiva high schools. We do not know our individual statistics, and the survey asked all kinds of questions about substance use, that's actually where it started, but also asked questions about connection to school, about family life. There's a ton of data and hundreds of pages of information. I want to share with you one slide here. The results, lots of the results would be good to talk about in another day. But I do want to ask you to pay attention, to take a look. I'm going to try to explain to you the bars here. At the top left, you'll see it says a protective profile. That means there are certain aspects in life that are risk factors. They put us at risk. There are certain factors in life that are considered protections. So strong family life is considered a protective factor. It means if you have strong family bonding, that's like a good thing. Religion is actually considered to be a strong protective factor. Good friends, strong protective factor. So just without understanding all the detail, just to give you a very broad sense, the teal color, the light blue, is the survey from 2019. The navy blue is the survey from 2020. Without saying anything, if you just look at it, you can see, wow, it's pretty much the same from both years. There's like 7,000 kids. It's pretty amazing. I also want to point out to you a yellow diamond in the middle. You see the yellow diamond in the middle? That actually is the data point from the United States of America. In the US, they do a survey every year at the National Institute of Drug Abuse. They've been doing it for decades. And what this survey did was stack up where we land relative to the rest of the United States. And actually, if you look at it, it's hard to see. At the top, the categories are community, family, school, peer, individual. As I said, good friends actually make for protective factors for doing well. And we're doing really well in a bunch of categories. The second column from the left is family attachment. In America, you see where the yellow diamond is? We're way above that. If you look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth from the right, religiosity, in America, it's pretty low down. In our community, way up at around 90%, because that's good for us. Religion helps us become better people. It's a protective factor. Family attachment makes us better people. One thing that was actually very surprising, there's only one area where we fall below the national average by a chunk. And it's called rewards for pro-social involvement in school. What that actually means is that when we asked kids, do the staff members in your school give you positive reinforcement for strong behavior, for good behavior? Again, this is not an SAR data point per se, just our community in general. It was pretty remarkable to us that both years we came out lower than the national average by a chunk. We were trying to figure out why it is that that was so. We don't know. We have a theory. The theory that we would posit is that in our community there are so many expectations, actually, that you guys do really well. You do really well in school, great social community, strong home community, go to shul all the time, go to camp, all those things that are very positive. But maybe, just maybe, as a school, as teachers, our expectations are so high that what we do is we point out to people the things that you're not doing right, much more than pointing out things that you are doing right. Now, I want to be clear to you. What I want to share with you now is what I would like for us as a school, actually, meaning the adults, to make as a commitment and to work on, and we've actually been talking about this. But I want you to think about this also for yourselves, between each other, and how you work. I want to give you an example for myself as a teacher. The personal example that I always think about is davening in school. I've run Minyan at SAR High School for a lot of years, and I know myself. I would like davening to be a holy space, one that's quiet, inspired, respectful, dignified, and I'd like it to be that way, and then I come to expect that it should just be that way, which means that when someone's talking or takes their phone out in the middle of davening, I'm actually quick to point it out. And that might be justified. But what I've realized in paying attention to this, and in light of what I've been talking about a couple of minutes for the past few minutes, I realized that I might spend a lot more time criticizing what I see that's not right than commending what I see that is. I'm not sure I invest as much time and energy commending someone for doing their best. I could just as well notice if a person doesn't, taking the davening example, doesn't daven Sukkot Zimra and talk sometimes through the beginning of davening, but actually says Shema well and davens Shemona Esrei, and I can say, you know what? Kol kavod for the way you daven Shemona Esrei today. As opposed to, you would talk a little bit during Psukkah de Zimra. Both might be true, both have their place, but the question that we need to think about in terms of our al-chaitz and the way that we use our speech is, are we using speech in order to be able to help each other grow or to keep each other in place? We as a faculty have begun to learn that it makes a huge difference when we reinforce positive behaviors. That has lots of positive impact, and there's lots of science behind it, and it's called the social development strategy. You might hear more about it in coming months and years. It says that parents and children, teachers, students, peers develop strong bonds around shared values when they receive reinforcement for positive actions, even the smallest ones. When Dr. Schwartz and some of your other teachers are giving out stickers for being a good davener and you get a kick out of that, that is a sticky way of actually communicating that idea. That's something that we can do better. That's something that as parents, it feels really important to me. I think that as peers and as friends, the same thing is true, and I want to encourage all of us to do that. Use words to help our friends grow spiritually, religiously, academically, emotionally. Prop your friends up with words. If you and your friends get up from lunch and one of your friends says, hold on, I have to bench, it's like a moment right there. Say, that's great. There are a lot of things you can say. Say, wow, that's great. Maybe even bench along. And if you're on the receiving end of such an encouragement, pay it forward. Try to catch your friend doing something good and give them that same strength. I want to take a couple of minutes to share just one more al-chait. There's another al-chait, which is al-chait shechatanu lefanecha bekalut rosh. For the chait we committed before you with frivolity, with unimportant things. This is a second thing that I'd like to focus on just for 5 minutes, about the way that we use our words. For this, we have to go a little deeper into the power and origin of words. Got to go back to creation. When God created the world, it's important to note that at no point does it say God made something. It always says, Vayomer Elokim, God said. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot teaches that the world was created with 10 ma'amarot. There is a deep idea that the Torah is teaching us when it teaches that God created the world through speech. One of the great Jewish philosophers of the 20th century's name was Martin Buber. He advanced a really interesting idea about human beings. This is his insight. He said, there's only one type of wrongdoing that is unique to human beings, and that is lying. He said, we might think that physical violence is the worst evil, and in many ways it is the worst evil, but many living beings have the capacity for physical violence. Only people have the capacity to lie. It's not because people are the only ones who use language. Birds communicate, animals communicate, but only humans can lie. Why is that? Buber understood that only human beings have the amazing capacity to imagine. And I'm asking you, I know you've been sitting here for a while, but I want you to just think about this idea. We can only use imagination because we use words. Through our imagination, we have the capacity to think of things that don't exist. That means that we have airplanes because human beings at some point were able to imagine a horse with wings and then figure out over hundreds and thousands of years how to get to creating something that is amazing. There are a million examples like that. When you think about it, when we imagine, we make things up that don't currently exist. It's actually a lie, in a sense, but it's also our greatest power. That is both dangerous and it is the source of infinite possibility. Because we have the ability to use words, we have the ability to put things together in creative ways. Words allow us to imagine. Imagination allows us to dream, to make things, to shape a world that does not yet exist. That is an enormous responsibility that we have to take very seriously. I will make a brief reference to Migdal Bavel. When the people at the beginning of creation decided that they were all of the same language and they were going to build the first construction project, the first technology in Chumash, and God knocked it down. And the question is, what was wrong with that? It was actually a beautiful thing. People working together, building stuff. And here's what I would like to share with you. Leon Kass, who wrote a commentary on Breshit, writes as follows: whereas animals pursue their aims thoughtlessly, using their own inborn powers, human beings take pride in exercising those powers that come to them as a result of their own devisings and imaginations. The city and tower express the human conquest of necessity, human self-sufficiency, and independence. It is amazing what people can do. The problem, he said, is that's all that people were talking about. They only spoke one language. That was the language of building stuff, getting a reputation, building more, creating more, becoming more important and more famous. What do we talk about? Sometimes I feel like we too are too focused on financial success, our careers, the latest technology, our grades, who has more likes. Maybe we talk too much about sports, movies. Our generation has its own sort of safa achat udvarim achadim, all things that have their place. But at this time of year, we should think about the social world that we are creating together. What we talk about creates the world that we live in. And at this time of Aseret Yemei Teshuva, we don't only have to think about whether we're hurting people with words, we also have to think about how are we using the power that we have to speak. Are we talking about frivolous things, unimportant things, which have their place? Or are we also talking about deep things? Who am I? What does it mean to be an Oved Hashem? How can I do more mitzvot? What does religion mean to me? How can I recognize the dignity of the person who is across from me and get to know that person better? I will conclude. We can create a powerful, caring, kind, thoughtful community with our words. As a yeshiva, an institution, I want to commit us to working on doing a better job at reinforcing the positive, at catching people doing the right thing, rewarding pro-social behavior, to creating spaces where our friendships can develop around listening, caring, getting to understand each other deeply, around Torah, around mitzvot, around strong values, and not just around what is popular. And that is true both on a communal level and on an individual level. I hope is that this year, as we focus our work on Midot, and in this season of Aseret Yemei Teshuva and Yom Kippur, we are able to reflect and grow in our capacity of how it is that we use speech. May the coming year be one of good health, fulfillment, love, peace, creativity, and spirituality. I wish you all a Gmar Chatima Tova and an easy fast. Have a great day, everybody. Tzom Kal.